Last week, we removed Gecko's chart table to convert the space into rope storage. This week, we're recycling the wood from the chart table and building shelves and a flip-up table for the galley to increase space efficiency on board. Now that Dan is spending the next 8 months on board Gecko with me, I wanted to make a little bit more storage room on my boat to make it more efficient for 2 people. 27 feet feels great for just me, but once you add someone else, it starts to get a bit cramped. So I have plans to make 3 things out of the material from the old chart table. One is that I'd like to build a flip-up table in the galley to increase counter space. It's gonna almost double our counter space. Dan loves cooking and he wants to be able to spread out a bit more. The other one is that I want to make a shelf in the galley for oils and spices that I don't have to keep reaching underneath the counter. And the third is pretty much just a lazy thing, but I love drinking coffee in bed, so I just want to build a little shelf on either side by the head of the bed, just big enough for a coffee mug to sit in so that I can have Dan bring me coffee in the morning. So it's really just a win-win for me. We're on our way to Mel's house to cut some shelves with tools. So Mel and Rich loaned us their very cool ute, as it's called in Australia, and that's what we're going to take to drive to their house. It's been really invaluable. So we're here with the master himself. Dan and I have drawn up some very sketchy sketches, and Rich is working his carpenter magic. So Rich and Mel are trying to sell their boat, and they've just sort of made a pile of old boat stuff that's quite useful to me.
We've got all the materials you're going to need to do your sanding of your bottom side now.
I have a haul out scheduled for Gecko where I'm going to redo the bottom paint, and Rich and Mel have all of this bottom paint and epoxy left over from when they did it to their boat. But since they're selling their boat, they say they don't need it anymore. I just think they're very generous people, but they have a whole sanding kit they've made for us of stuff to borrow. Ski goggles to put on to protect your eyes from the dust, respirators for sanding, sanders, sandpaper, and then also all the acetone and epoxy that we might need, in addition to a primer coat, which you do when you take the bottom paint back to fiberglass, a tie coat, which you put on between the primer coat and the bottom paint, and then bottom paint itself, which is black, which is the color that Gecko likes the best. So this is saving us probably over $1,000 in materials. It's so very generous of them, and it just makes me excited for hauling out the Gek.
That'll do. There's probably enough there to do 3 coats on the bottom side of Gek, so.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Gecko's never had 3 coats of bottom paint because I cannot afford it, so this is amazing.
Yeah, we'll get you through Indonesia, that's
yeah. I want to do some filleting in the joints, so I'm collecting some beautiful wood flour from the cuttings so that I can mix this in with the epoxy glue and make it all the same color. We've cut everything out on Rich's chop saw, and we have it in little piles. The flip-up table pile, the coffee shelves pile, and the oil shelf pile, all ready to go home and be dry fit. So what we're going to do now is the dry fit. And what you do when you're dry fitting a project is that it's before you sand it, before you varnish it, it's just sort of the raw, uncut version. You're just putting it all together in the space and making sure that it's actually going to fit in the space. And the reason you want to do a dry fit, especially on a boat, is that nothing is square on a boat, nothing is flat on a boat. So you often have to go in with a little hand planer or some 80 grit sandpaper on a stick and tweak and poke and prod to make everything fit perfectly. If you finished everything and then you tried to do that, you're just going to mess up your finish and have to do it over. So a dry fit's a really nice, low stress way of making sure everything goes together, getting all the holes drilled, and then you just take it apart, paint it, and when you reassemble it, everything fits perfectly. So we're starting with the cleat stock, just getting this in here. We have to have the whole table out as far as these nuts go out. So we're just going to use this for everything to swing off of, and then the little flippy arm actually also then has space to sit behind it, so it's kind of dual purpose. When you're drilling, you obviously want to make sure that you don't drill too far and go through the bulkhead. So you can either use tape to mark the drill bit, or if it's a super long drill, which in this case it is because the screws are long, just put the drill bit out as far as the screw is going in, and then you know when you get to the end, that's where you stop. It's taking quite a bit of logic to figure out how this table is going to go, but I finally figured out the right hinges orientation. So Dan's out there right now cutting the hinges down. and I am assembling all the little screwsies. So I saved all the screws from the hinges when we took it off the chart table. So this is all basically recycled chart table that we're making into like a mini version for the flip up table. So these are all the screws that came off the same hinges that we used on the chart table. So we're just gonna use those again. So we're, this is the dry fit, so we weren't gonna put the trim on, but it turns out that the hinge has to go through the trim into the table. So we're just quickly gluing it on. We learned that super glue works better than wood glue, but it's more expensive. That's why people don't use it. We Googled it. So we don't have wood glue, so we just super glued this on really quickly. And I have a clamp and a Dan.
Damn clamp.
I covered him in a warm blanket, but put him next to the fan. And we're just letting the super glue dry so that when we screw through it, this trim doesn't get pushed around. Oh yeah, I was thinking, so I'm looking at this wood flour and a lot of it's too big, but there's some really thin.
We'll put it through a coffee grinder.
Oh yeah, true. This is the sawdust that we grabbed from the bottom. So what you do is you mix up your epoxy, you add your colloidal silica, and then you add a little bit of wood flour to it just to make it the same color as the wood. And then when it fills, instead of being a yellowy white color, it's a nice woody color, which is what I did for all these drawers. On the corners, I did something that my dad taught me called filleting, which is where you build a box and you take epoxy glue mixed with the wood flour, and you can't even really tell. These are just 2 pieces of marine grade ply that I screwed together, and then I took a popsicle stick and just did a little whoop swipe with that epoxy glue to make a really nice smooth edge, and that also kind of connects it together a bit better. Working with another person full-time is taking a bit of adjusting for me. I've been living on my boat alone for almost 5 years, with the exception of my sister visiting for a month or 2 at a time and the odd friend or 2. For the most part, all the maintenance and all the decisions on GEC have been mine and mine alone, and now I'm kind of trying to learn how to share and trust and listen to Dan's input. I used to work professionally on boats as part of the crew, but I think it's different when it's my boat and I'm letting people in. Gecko has been my whole world for so long, traveling solo. She's the only constant that I have in my life. She's always there. She gets me across every single ocean, and I feel like she's my break from the outside world where we can't control the world around us, but I can control my boat, which has sort of become an extension of myself. And in the world of sailing, there's people who make assumptions about me based on my age and my gender, and when I'm alone on my boat, there's none of that because it's just me. Not that Dan is anything but subservient, as he should be. It's a very good exercise in trust, and also just trusting myself to have the skills to teach someone else how to do things. You know, trust him that he has mine and Gecko's best interests at heart. In a way, it's like he's dating 2 women, which is doubly as difficult. How's it going? Temperature rising?
It's sticking. It's going pretty good. Faster than I thought. I feel like I could let go, but we're striving for perfection, so.
Oh yeah, always. I didn't know that you can use super glue as wood glue. I thought it would just soak into the grain. But it is a super glue gel, and I don't know everything apparently.
No way.
Poor Dan was stuck under the drop cloth for about 15 minutes. Such a trooper. It's so hot and humid here right now that we drag Fernald the fan everywhere we go. Being in the marina means there's no breeze and no refreshing dips to break up the work, so all hail Fernald. Out here, what's going on?
I'm the electric sander, because the electric sander dug divots, so we're taking the old, we'll make it look new.
Yeah.
So now that it's nicely sanded and looks pretty, we'll varnish it down. It's quite cool, all the wood's recycled, but we're just putting like the ugly blue bits hidden from sight, nice brown bits on display. Maybe there's a few painty bits, but yeah, we're just trying to make the old wood look slightly pretty without spending too much time on it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Down here, it's gluing station, so I have this big piece of ply to protect the settee, and then some liquid nails, and this is the flip up table. Just gonna liquid nails, the trim on. We did a lot of Googling and it seems like that is just fine. So that's gonna be my, actually I see a sanding job for Dan on, maybe he should scuff up all of these. I'm gonna do that for him. I'm gonna get him to do that first, and then I'm just gonna glue the trim on, and then we can, once that's set, which takes 24 hours, I'm gonna make up an epoxy glue with some wood flour and just go in and fill all these cracks, smooth them out, and then sand everything and give it a couple nice coats of epoxy. While you're in sanding mode, do you mind just getting the bottoms of all of these? Alright, we're taking the shelf, the oil shelf and the galley apart. It's been dry fit. Now we're going to sand it down. I'm gonna do epoxy fillets in the sides at the same time that I'm filling in the gaps on the flip up table, and then we're gonna give it a nice little coat of paint. So Dan is taking apart the tops and bottoms, and I'm getting the sanding stuff ready. So we're just gonna use this hand block sander and a 220 grit. Alright, so I am getting ready to fill in the gaps on the trim of this table. First I thought epoxy mixed with wood flour, but epoxy is so annoying to work with and it's such a small amount and it's not structural. I chatted with my dad and he recommended that I just do wood glue mixed with wood flour just to make it sandable and sort of match the wood itself. The galley oil shelf is a pretty simple design. We like to keep it nice and simple always. It basically just has these two edges, and then we've chosen to put the cleat stock inside because you can't see it once all the bottles are in, and then it makes the outside profile really nice. This is all from the old chart table, including the cleat stock, and then this piece of wood is a nice piece of Australian hardwood that Rich gave us. And then underneath, we just have a nice long cleat that runs the whole length, so it's supported on the bottom, and then the triangles are also cleated in, so it's very solid. I was thinking of painting everything white and just leaving this really nice piece of trim that Rich gave us brown. Dan pointed out it was kind of fun to celebrate the old chart table, and I don't know, I think it fits the aesthetic of the boat anyway, just having the raw edges showing slash who cares. And Dan's just thrown some condiments in here that we think we'll use, and obviously this will sort of evolve over time. The first two coats are on the flip up table and it just looks beautiful. I'm going to do 2 more coats today and then we'll call it good, because I'm using this varnish, which is like sickeningly expensive, but it's really good stuff, and I don't really use that much of it, so, and it'll definitely give this a nice hard finish that when we're using it as a work table it's not going to scratch too much. Beyond this galley shelf being in, we've also installed our little coffee shelves in the V-berth. So these just fit in this triangle space really nicely, and it just fits 1 cup of coffee for those morning coffee moments. And that's just kind of, I don't know. It's the fun of having a boat where you feel like you can really just do whatever you want to it. I know a lot of people who cruise have boats where they want to really keep it as it was when they bought it so they can resell it, and with Gecko I sort of that ship sailed a long time ago when I tore everything apart and redid it. So now I just feel like it's my little project home, and it feels really good to create the spaces that I want to in my boat, and it's fun to do this sort of thing with Dan and sort of plan what we want together. He's learning a lot about basically everything I learned from my dad about constructing shelves and lockers on boats. I'm teaching to him, which is kind of a cool like moment. And today's job is to sort of reorganize the galley. Something Dad's been looking forward to for ages, because part of this is him learning where everything is, and then as he comes from a chefing background, I'm just sort of giving him free rein to organize the galley as he sees fit, and as he does a lot of the cooking, we're fine with that. This is how to know you used to work on a super yacht. That is rust busting the kettle. Oh, it looks beautiful. Look at that.
Shiny. It almost starts to get the bottom stuff too, but... This episode comes to you from the forests of Holly.
Alright, so we are, we bought these knife magnets. This is part of Dan's idea of remodeling the kitchen. How do I say that?
It's a Danism.
Dan and I are redoing the galley on Gek, and one of his suggestions was to get these knife magnets for hanging the knives, and we're gonna put them here, which is a totally unused space. There's 2 magnets, which is, we ordered 1, we got 2, so we're gonna put them both on, because the way we're doing it is slightly not necessarily the way that you should properly do it. So I'm not entirely sure how thick the fiberglass is between here and the edge of the cockpit, and I'm nervous to drill into it because I don't want to drill through it. So what we're gonna do is just epoxy these on, which is fine because they're really light. The thing with epoxy is that it takes a really long time to dry, and we have no way of clamping these. I don't want to screw them in, and Dan doesn't want to stand here for 3 hours and hold it. I'm not sure why. Take that up with him personally. We're making an epoxy glue, so I'm just using obviously the 2-part, and then I add this colloidal silicone, which just turns it into a glue.
So why do you love the West system so much, Doris? What's so easy about this?
West system is the best system. Actually, it's not West system in here anymore. I just kept these containers. I just fill it up wherever I go in the world.
What's so great about the containers?
Well, it's pretty cool because you just do 1 pump of each, and the pumps are specially calibrated so that they mix it the exact right ratios, so you're not trying to measure it out. It's just perfect every time, and that's just really easy, and that's why I keep reusing these containers even though they're all rusty and falling apart. So how does it feel to be a human clamp?
Pretty good. Pretty good. I feel like I'm getting paid to do nothing, but then I remember I'm not being paid.
Alright, so we've replaced Dan with some tape. I didn't say it. And he held it until it was sort of decently set. They still squidge around, but we put enough tape on it that it's holding in place. We're gonna let that set. A continuation of Dan's plan to remodel the galley involves moving the trash can from where it was under the sink to over where the chart table used to be. The reason we're doing this is that it was really annoying under the sink because it's really not that much space that you can actually have in it, and then it hits all of these and it can only go down to about this far, so it's actually a tiny little space, and then when I'm at sea and the stove is gimbaled over, you can't even open this at all. So Dan is going to put it over by the chart table so it's just a lot easier to access. So right now Dan's making sure it's level. So
as level as boats can be.
Yeah, level compared to whatever this measurement is, which is sort of mostly level. That's the best we've got. Gek's got a bit of a port list right now, so we couldn't, I mean, you can never really use a level on a boat because a boat's never level, so you just have to do the best you can.
So I drilled my hole, I leveled her up, and I'll unscrew. I marked the screw so that I don't go through the wood. Okay.
We don't want the trash can to be permanently affixed, we want it to be easy to get out, so Dan basically drilled in these teardrop shapes that end in big-headed screws, so you can push the trash can up and then they slide out, better done with 2 hands, and then you just have these 2 little screw heads, and then for putting it back in you just line them up, put them in, and they slide down. We are now going to give a live demonstration of using the new trash can featuring Dan Green. Working with Dan is really great because he just has this bottomless fountain of energy and enthusiasm for boat projects, and he brings with him a really awesome skill set. We both like to cut corners in our work, but we do it in completely different ways, so I feel like in that way we balance each other out, and it's just amazing to have someone that I can ping all my ideas off of, because discussing things with him often makes me realize what the flaws in my plans were before I execute the plan and realize the flaw halfway through. Here's the finished product. Flip-up table. This has been a project that I've been wanting to do for years. And it's down, it basically just kind of sits really nicely against the settee here. It's pretty low profile. And then to connect it, Dan went to the hardware store and looked around at all these different connecting options and landed on this. I think it cost $2. It's just plastic, so it's this little hook here, and then on this side there's that little eye. It just fit the space perfectly, so bang, and now it doesn't move. It was a very clever decision. And then you can see here I've filled in the gaps in everything with wood glue mixed with wood flour and given everything a couple coats of varnish so it's nice and shiny. Flips up, and then this is the little arm. It flips out. We're messing around with trying to do some sort of a fancy thing to hold it in place, but what we realized was that we didn't have to. We cut it so that when it sits flat, it clears the bolts here, and I think it also looks nicer if it has a bit of a swoop in it. This is actually the original swoop from when it was the arm holding up the chart table, so we just kind of left that in and then cut the ends shorter. So now when you're in the galley, you have this whole extra bit of counter space, which is, you know, basically the same size as this counter space. So it just makes it that much easier to cook. Our final carpentry project is to find a place for Triple Pounder, the giant speaker that Dan bought as a housewarming gift for Gecko. I mean, she's pretty big. We've identified a place for her, and Dan has been designing a speaker holder. It's gone through a lot of iterations. Time for speaker shelf. This is Rich IKEA. He's cut all the bits out. He's labeled them. Now we're just going to assemble into 2 squares first, screwing them together, and then we'll put those on the wall. It's morning, we're only 1 coffee in. Dan is on the 4th iteration.
I wish it was
of
the
4th.
This square.
The final one. No matter how this comes out, we're just keeping it. Rich gave us this beautiful wood for the speaker square. We were gonna make it into a shelf that was gonna hang above the starboard side settee. So Dan made 2 squares, drilled all the holes for the through bolts. We realized that the bottom square could be a lot smaller because of the way the speaker kind of goes in on the bottom. So we changed that square and made it smaller. And then we were like, all right, now it's time to figure out where the speaker goes on the bulkhead. So we went to go test the speaker, and we decided that actually it made more sense to put the speaker just sitting on the floor, because then it's not elevated, you don't lose headspace on the settee, and it's very out of the way. So then we measured out the 2 squares to put on the floor. And then we realized that we only needed 1 square, but this was after we'd already drilled the holes in the bulkhead. But we took one of the squares that Dan had made, but the bottom square was too small and the top square was too big, because now it was going in a different place entirely. So last night, Dan made another square. He drank a few beers in the process of making the square and accidentally made it into a rectangle. Sanded it down this morning. We got up, measured it out, and we were like, you know what? This is a rectangle. So now he's just cutting down the last 2 sides in this 3-day project, which has resulted in 1 square and the simplest possible solution for the speaker.
Yeah, apart from the fact that I'm trying to cut hardwood
With a hacksaw.
with a hacksaw.
With a shitty hacksaw.
You're like, can you cut this into a perfectly straight line, please?
I bought this hacksaw in Martinique in the Caribbean. It was the cheapest one I could find. I think it cost me about €3. It's kind of a piece of shit, and Dan now knows it as well. So I'm sitting here with the creator of the square. How many squares would you say you've made in your life?
9.
And how many of those were made in the last 3 days?
9. Well, define square. One of them might technically be
Check this out though. We've come up with the simplest solution, and I think it's just very elegant. We through bolted this to the bulkhead, and now the speaker just sits through it and on the floor, and then we change. And then it's just this little guy. You can get under that easily if you're cleaning, and then you just stick it in. It fits very snugly, which is what we wanted, so it doesn't rattle around. Now that our carpentry projects are done, we're moving on to renovating the galley. Something that we've kind of discovered on GEC, now that the 2 of us are trying to live on board, is that a lot of my organizational systems were dependent on only me living here. So I can remember in a disorganized locker where I put stuff, because I'm the only one who's putting it there. And then as soon as there's 2 people involved, if it's a disorganized locker, you're both gonna put it in different places and you don't know where the other one put it. So we pretty quickly realized that we need a slightly better organizational system. So that's some of the impetus behind pulling everything out and kind of trying to make a system we can both use where we both know where stuff is. I thought the biggest challenge would be space, but it's not, because Dan doesn't have that much stuff. I don't have that much stuff. So the issue, rather than space, is actually organization and organizing things. It's really fun, especially in a small space when you're trying to make the best use of it as possible. Any good project starts with more of a mess than what it was initially. So on the floor we have all of the, I really love condiments. We've taken everything out of this locker and we decided this is gonna be the oils and vinegars that we don't use as regularly, but that we still are gonna want access to easily. And then also, of course, very important, popcorn. And then under here, you can't really store food in here. This is the ice box, and it's just not enough ventilation to keep food fresh. So we're also keeping condiments in here, but these are the harder to access ones because they'll be under everything we're cooking. This is editing Holly, just having a little interjection. When I say this is the icebox, I mean when the boat was initially built in 1982, it had an icebox built in, so it's basically a stainless steel box that is insulated by foam. When I first got the boat, it still had the foam around it, but I pretty quickly learned that it's not great. Like, the icebox will maybe stay icy for 24 hours. It has yet to unbox itself, but it definitely unices itself pretty quickly. So I ripped all of the insulation off because it was just taking up space below the counter and I could use that for other storage, and I've since turned it into just a storage area because it's just having an icebox in remote places does not make sense, and doesn't really make sense. I mean, a cooler is more efficient than this old icebox. So when I say icebox, I facetiously call this the fridge. Dan has some ideas about hanging things around the galley. Oh, and we've also installed the knife rack.
Well, all the cupboards are quite full and I brought on more cooking stuff, so we're expanding the I guess kitchen tools area. So on the back of this cupboard door we put a bunch of hangs so that everything's in here. Inside the cupboard's nicer because then it's not all going to rust quite as quick. I just liquid nailed some foam on here so that when we're at sea it will sound cushioned. Everything will lock away in the cupboard, and then just putting a little bit of this bungee on, so a screw and a nail on the end. We tried to melt it to make it more secure, but it just melted it, it didn't lock it. So we're going to screw that on, stretch it across nice and tight and screw it on the other side, and then everything is readily available. But at sea it should be silent as a mouse. Should be cool.
So the finished look of Dan's reorganization of the galley, we have obviously this, and then he has installed these two hooks to hang his two favorite used kitchen utensils here. The knife rack, which is back here, and where the garbage used to be, which is now hanging things. This drawer still is, and has always been, always will be, the tea drawer. This drawer's cutlery, still cutlery, was always cutlery. But this drawer, I used to call it the big things drawer. It was where I kept all the big things, like that sort of thing. But now it is spices. We bought these little spice jars and we've labeled them all with cryptic pictures of the spices, which only we know. And we have additional spices in here. And everything else of these drawers had stayed the same. This is kind of the coffee area, which Dan just did a little cleaning out, but we have our milk powder, the coffee stuff. This is the oils and vinegars drawer that I showed you before. This one's a bit miscellaneous. It has our little cutting board. It has our immersion blender. This one's pots and pans. This is just plates and bowls. It's always been that way. And then Dan reorganized this locker too. This has a bunch of Tupperwares in it, with oats, bran, seeds, things to make our own granola. So Dan's just come back from his shop for tomorrow, and we found a really awesome storage space under the floorboards. I've never put anything here. So we have kombuchas in this little section. Then here, this one's a little bit wider, so we can put bottles of beer this way. It's a very cool storage area. I'm really excited.
All the way under.
It does. Both sides. I'm really excited to fill it up. So
hidden from customs.
Yeah, what's
What?
under your floorboards? Nothing!
Nothing! Yeah. Super exciting. Sadly we have to drink all the bottled beers before we sail away, but
I know,
we can
so
do it.
sad. Thanks for watching this week's episode. I put out new YouTubes every 2 weeks on Mondays, and for my patrons, you guys get a snack on the weeks that I don't put out a full-length YouTube episode. Thank you so much to all of my patrons who are supporting me and making this trip possible. If you'd like to become a patron, my Patreon is patreon.com/windhippie. You guys get exclusive weekly videos, things I don't show on YouTube, specific things, questions, it's very fun and exciting, and also real-time updates of where I actually am because my videos lag behind on YouTube. One-time donations, I have a PayPal, paypal.me/windhippie, and merchandise, all in the links below. Thank you for subscribing and liking my videos. It really helps me, you know, get some money, which is all the cruising fund comes from you guys. And I hope you're enjoying this series of Gecko being in the marina, Gecko being hauled out. It's sort of the overhaul series. Every time I'm in a country like Australia or New Zealand where it's easy to get boat parts and easy to have the boat somewhere safe, I like to do big overhaul periods to get her ready for the times when I'm in places like Indonesia where it's harder to get those sorts of things. So Australia is just a lot of boat work, which is exhausting but kind of fun and really nice to have Dan along with me to help out with it. So thank you guys for subscribing this video. Thank you Tish for helping me remember when I need to do another edit and get them scheduled. Right now I'm doing a bunch of edits in Darwin, getting ready for my passage to Indonesia. And that's all. Thank you guys for your comments. I love reading them, and I'll see you next week. Patrons, YouTube people, I'll see you in 2 weeks with another full-length episode.